Mervyn King, I believe we have a Fed meeting on March 15th. I know it's a delicate issue for you to speak about any central bank policy. Are we in a time of orthodox theory? Are we in a time where normal monetary analysis works? Or with our great distortion, are we on unfamiliar ground?
I think we're on unfamiliar ground in terms of the models that central banks and commentators have used in the last quarter century. And I think the way to see that is very simply that inflation is pretty close to the long-run desired level. Unemployment, if anything, is a little bit below the potential long-run rate. And yet interest rates are close to zero. And all the models would suggest that we couldn't be in this position unless interest rates were at a much higher level. So there's something missing in the model in order for this to be true. And I think central banks around the world are struggling to find out what it is that's missing from their analysis. And you can now see the Federal Reserve clearly wishing to embark on a path of returning interest rates to something a little bit closer to their long-run normal level.
I love the idea of the phrase missing in the model. Bring up the chart again here. This is the Bank of Japan, and of course Governor King and at the time Governor Bernanke knew all about this. Here's the Bank of Japan in the year 2000 with their rate rise, and then they had to give it up. This is the fear of every central banker, isn't it, Mervyn King?
Well, I think it's a natural fear that if a central bank raises interest rates and then it turns out subsequently that it would have been better not to have done it, which is always possible, no one knows the future, then the central bank gets blamed for having brought about a further downturn. But I think, interestingly, that President Trump, if he's achieved anything, has actually got the Federal Reserve off a hook, in that both his words, which have increased optimism in the economy, and he's taken responsibility for the fate of the US economy. I think up until now, the last 8 or 9 years, it's been central banks as the only game in town, that central banks were responsible for what happened in the world economy. Now we can see President Trump taking direct responsibility for what will happen to the US. That, I think, makes it much easier now for the Fed to contemplate raising rates, because markets expect rates to go up. So it's unlikely that if the Fed does raise rates in March, that it will be remotely a surprise.
I guess the markets, Lord King, may actually punish the Fed through the divergence play, sending dollar higher. Who has the most difficult job in terms of central banks nowadays, amongst the big ones?
Oh, I think the European Central Bank undoubtedly has the most difficult job, because it's struggling to impose the same monetary policy on a group of countries that self-evidently need quite different monetary policies. Germany needs higher interest rates and a higher exchange rate. Countries in the south need the opposite.
And so what does that mean for actually the monetary union? Will the Eurozone survive the next 5 to 10 years?
I think that's impossible to judge, because it's a political decision as to whether or not to keep it going. But I'd give you the words of Emmanuel Macron, now regarded by many as the favourite to win the French presidential election. He said a few weeks ago that he didn't think monetary union could survive another 10 years without radical changes. By radical changes, what he meant was a fiscal union, which in large part means that Germany pays for the rest. You can see there's also a debate in Germany by which they mean the opposite, which is that countries should not rely on Germany to bail them out. And the tension between these two positions has not been resolved in any way, shape or form since the crisis emerged in its more serious form in 2010.